Russia is advancing in Bakhmut, but for the first time in a long time, we are seeing Ukrainian forces take back territory elsewhere. Is it the start of the big counteroffensive or just another map update? I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. It's March 28th, 2023. This is your daily Ukraine update. Let's get right into it. Okay. Let's take a look at the control map. This is where the biggest story is. First, when we look at Bakhmut, all right, you guys can see that there are some minor advances. Again, Russian forces systematically creeping up the Bakhmutka, trying to fold Ukrainian forces off of this natural obstacle. And again, doing a fair job of succeeding. As we have talked about, Bakhmut, not clear that it is of military, it is necessarily worth the price that Ukrainians may be paying to hold it. What I find interesting is in a recent article, the commanding general of the Bakhmut area, Bakhmut theater, I guess, has said, right, that he actually made a visit to the front to solve, quote, problematic issues that prevent effective execution of combat tasks, which is extremely vague, but it implies that there's some kind of issue that is holding up their ability to be effective, and that he's taken operational decisions aimed at strengthening our capabilities to deter and inflict damage on the enemy. Doesn't say anything about when the visit took place, but it indicates that this battle for Bakhmut, Ukraine plans to continue it. And while the defenders are certainly resilient in the face of extreme conditions, he says the defense of Bakhmut is due to military necessity, and that we're calculating all possible options for the development of events. Now, this is fascinating because it's not. And we've talked about in the past that Ukraine probably believes that by holding Bakhmut, they're pinning elite Russian forces in place, allowing the counteroffensive elsewhere to prepare and then execute without having to face elite Russian airborne or Wagner forces. Of course, you have a similar dynamic playing out in Avdiivka, where while there's been no progress, there are reports that some of the few remaining capable Wagner forces, so not necessarily the conscripts, but forces with proper training, have been deployed there in an effort to try to take Avdiivka. And this is, of course, a method. But here's where things are most significant, what I found most noteworthy is, first off, north of the Crimea-Lyman sort of axis, you see Russian forces actually making some advances into this salient here. Again, not significant territory, not a game-changing threat, but nonetheless, one of the rare movements north of Bakhmut. But here's where things are even more interesting. You have at least a very small, again, not very significant push by Ukrainian forces out of Bilohorivka. This is, of course, south of the Seversky Donetsk, a salient here that's actually been in place for some time. The lines have been static for a while, and this is the first time in a long time that we've seen actual movement in these front lines. And you can see, again, Ukrainian forces, is there major territory being seized? No. Is it significant, or how significant is it? Not very. But what's significant is that it shows that Ukrainian forces are back, at least on a limited basis, to launching counterattacks. We've seen sort of Russia attriting them, taking slices of territory, but here we at least see some evidence that Ukrainian forces are pushing back. Is this the part of a larger counteroffensive? I guess my answer would be maybe, but not super likely. And the reason is because you have a lot of obstacles here that would make turning this into a larger counteroffensive effort really difficult. The biggest of which is the Seversky Donetsk. You can see here it forms a natural barrier right, that bends around along this administrative border. And it's very easy to slow an advancing army by blowing bridges and in placing obstacles, right? This is a natural choke point, and you guys can see just how significant this Seversky Donetsk is. It really stretches a long way into here. And while Ukrainian forces may choose not to, if this were the counteroffensive location, they might choose and say, no, we're not going to cross the Seversky Donetsk. Instead, we're going to, clear out Russia from here and then turn south. But there's the problem with turning south is that the frontline forces, think of them as a smear of butter across a piece of toast, right? They're stretched out, but they're at the front lines. There's very little happening behind the front lines. And so by turning south, you would turn into the largest concentrations of Russian forces. It wouldn't make sense from a maneuver warfare perspective to give the enemy a shorter distance to establish defensive lines. So I really am inclined to say that this is probably not part of a larger counteroffensive, simply because the terrain is just so very unfavorable. It also, of course, would involve turning into and cutting between two huge concentrations of Russian forces. You can see them concentrated in the north and in the south near Bakhmut. And while I don't put a ton of stock in these force arrays, I think they broadly identify the location of major concentrations of Russian forces. Now, we look at the combat map. We can see that actually there's been they just haven't done any updates or reporting on ground combat in the last 24 hours. When we talk about the UK defense, they're the ones who actually reported that not only that Russia is focusing on Avdiivka, and that the Russia's tank regiments continue to struggle with discipline and combat effectiveness, right? And as we talked about, while some of these reconstituted formations have had a period of training in Belarus, these formations still aren't that combat effective. Maneuver warfare is hard. It's technology driven. It's heavily favors training. It's hard. It's hard to coordinate tanks. And it's really, really demands a lot from not just your tank crews who have to be really proficient, but your leadership as well at every level. So armored warfare, very tough for an army with minimal training. And the result, of course, is that you can't ask them to do much in terms of sophistication or sophisticated tactics. All you can really ask them to do is frontal assaults, and those are going exactly as you would expect. Anyway, guys, the only other thing I had for you is, of course, that you guys should check out Combat Vet News. The biggest change in Combat Vet News is that we finally have access to PayPal. For weeks, we've been working with PayPal to try to get them to enable members to sign up using PayPal, and it is finally done. Of course, I was booted off Patreon. Their Patreon no longer cares or wants to listen to war content. And so I brought all my YouTube videos are hosted on this site for free, and you can become a member and get access to members only content. These are GoPro videos, drone footage, the intense combat stuff that lets us see the ground level view of this war, which is always insights you can't get anywhere else. And I've hosted them all for the members who go and support this channel. I really appreciate you guys. I appreciate everything. Be sure to check it out. Link is in the description. I'll see you in the next one.